And edit.
Edit it.
That's it.
Yeah.
It's enlisted.
I just put that there.
Okay. So when it's ready to go public, then. Or still when people view from the website.
Well, you can only see on the website when I put it in there. So right now we can be streaming and still be doing our own thing. Doing nothing. So we're like,
Now I still need to.
sorry. Okay.
Alright.
That's fine. Come again. You can pick this. No, no, no. Listen.
It's handwritten.
Come again. You pick this. No, no, no. Listen.
It's handwritten.
Come again. You pick this. No, no, no. Listen.
AJ, I want you to do something for me. I want you to speak to the microphone for me. Yeah. Camera charger. Camera charger. AJ.
You know, we put that's all. Absolutely, no, I kind of know. I know for sure. Let me.
What are you doing?
Hello? 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 You?
I can hear. And
Yes.
are you clean it?
Yeah, that PC for that.
Yeah, no fun.
Yeah.
I'm using that the MTN.
Right. Just terrible.
Uh, Yeah. Funny. Yes, yes.
The password.
Here, here. Love something. Uh, Not yet. Yes, I'm fixing the sound. Yes. Password. 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 Yeah. Small, small. Yeah. No, not yet. Oh, coming up.
Are we good? Are we good to go?
No.
Are we good? Are we good to go?
No.
Are we good? Are we good to go?
No.
Are we good? Are we good to go?
No.
Are we good? Are we good to go?
No.
Are we good? Are we good to go?
No.
The Americans, wherever you are, without storytelling, which is said to be a reflection on events in society, situations, history, whatever. We cannot, as human beings, live without telling stories. In Africa, of course, in the ancient times and now, storytelling could be in the form of poetry recitals at the palaces of kings. It could be the familiar moonlight story sharing. It could even be in the drums that we used to play and still play. So, as I say, it's part of humanity, and Africa is part of humanity. Wale, what are your initial impressions on a topic like this, the place of storytelling?
I don't know how to put it with it properly.
Well, thank you, Ivan. Yes, as you rightly put it, storytelling has been a long-standing tradition in Africa. And apart from the idea of using the event to tell stories, storytelling also encompasses the transmission of culture, of ideas, teaching of morality, and keeping the community together. Because many of these stories that are told are usually full of lessons for the audience and so other things. And traditionally too, the African culture devoted to more of an oral society. Our literature is usually more spoken than written. And that is why people believe, or whether correctly or wrongly, some of the reasons why reading has been a big problem in Africa is because we are used to the spoken word rather than the written word. And then, of course, we also know that in the olden days, African stories usually revolve around some animal tricksters. In some cultures, the tortoise is usually the hero of African stories. In some other cultures, like I think Ghana, the spider, and Nancy, I think you call it, is usually the trickster. And then the question is, why animals in our stories? Again, people will say, maybe it's because we Africans are used to living with wild animals, which again is a debatable point. But now that we're in the modern era, I think that storytelling is changing, both in content and in the target audience. Now, people use other things to tell stories. Narratives of apartheid regime in South Africa, the issue of the genocide in Rwanda, and all these other political issues are now being used to tell stories and narratives. And apart from using it in the oral tradition, we are using modern technology. It's being used now to tell our stories. We have digital storytelling systems all around. We also have some NGOs that are devoted to storytelling, and the audience is becoming large, multiracial, multicultural, and also, so I think storytelling is alive and well in Africa, and we are gaining more audience using technology and other things that are in the modern era.
Yes, that's interesting. Francis, Wale talks of spoken versus the orality of African storytelling, and then there is now the dimension of technology, the internet, and how it's speeding up the storytelling cultures in Africa and the rest of the world. Your impressions?
Yeah, thank you very much, Ivan, and thank you everybody for coming. I will indeed take it from where Wale stopped by placing it in a certain context, by asking why are we discussing this in the first place. And I think it has become a topic for us to discuss because of the world we find ourselves in, that is the globalized world. So how can we be part of the globalized world and still tell our stories, make our voice heard in the globalized world, which I would like to refer to as localizing our stories in a globalized world. So that is the context, or in fact the question I asked and tried to also respond to. Now, talking about oral storytelling that Wale spoke about, when the topic was given to us, that is storytelling in a modern Africa, I tried to look at it from the oral storytelling and what the situation is currently. So I tried to group it into three, where I am thinking about the oral storytelling, which we are all aware of. Then the second group will be the written storytelling. Then what I refer to as electronic storytelling. So Wale spoke at length about the oral storytelling. So I will look at and then also touch on the written. So when it comes to the written, elaborating on what Wale said, we have different approaches to it. In other words, what we refer to as genres. So you are telling a story, but you are telling it in a particular genre. And Wale mentioned poetry. You can tell the story in a story form. You can also tell the same story using other means referred to as a non-fiction. You can still tell a story using that form. And when you come to and I also want to add painting to the written. I consider painting as a form of storytelling using the canvas. Therefore, I would like to add it to the written part of storytelling. Then you come to the electronic storytelling, or using electronic means to tell story. Then you are looking at films. Even with the films alone, we have different genres. Then you are looking at television. With television too, you have different genres of telling the story. Then you are looking at the internet, blogs, and so on. Now, the issue will be for us to learn how to tell the story using different mediums and still make the impact on the world as Africans. How do we tell our stories using these different mediums such that the impact from the oral storytelling can be still maintained? I think that should be the questions that we should be asking. And when it comes to film, some people have started in the 1970s and 80s using different forms of films. I actually brought an excerpt that I would like to show, but it's late now, where adaptation and transfer of oral storytelling is brought into film. So, in not telling the story orally, you can watch it told in a film. So it's back to where I started from. How do we impart the globalized world using our storytelling motifs?
Well, that is interesting, and it comes back to the question of orality and spoken, and the relevance in contemporary literature. If we go back to the poetry of, for instance, Kofi Awono, or even Professor Kofi Aido, that transition of oral poetry from whether among the Saudi Navals, or whether you look at J.H. Kwabena Nketia, the praise poetry of the Ashanti court or palace music, which he turned into ethnomusic, musicology as it came to be known. Not much, perhaps, has changed. Even if it did, it places us in a new transition position. To what extent Wale can can start with it. To what extent will you say that orality or the basis of African storytelling perhaps could die out in this advent of technology?
Yes, I think it was Ngugi wa Thiong'o that used that phrase of oral chop for African oral literature. And I think his idea was giving us, to give African literature a peculiar genre in writing. And I believe that this tradition is not dying. It's only taking a different perspective. As we can see, many of our young ones are not good in our traditional languages. Even some of us, that is, even the adults too, they are not too good in the culture. And then the languages, just like we had yesterday, when Professor Aindogo and the other prof were interviewed, that we must have a concerted plan to make African languages, culture, to be more relevant to our children, to the young ones. And one of the ways to do this is to use our oral literature to propagate current issues. I'll give an example. We have some developmental issues that our children, our young ones, are debating now. The issue of gender violence, the issue of even the COVID-19 pandemic. How do we use our traditional oral literature to make it relevant to these young people so that they will understand what we are doing? And this has been done by some authors who have woven stories around these developmental issues. And these stories are now, some of them have been put on audiovisual elements and circulated through the social media to people. Also, I have a copy of one of the COVID-19 literature that has been adapted for young people. This one is one of my books. I call it Corona Tales, nursery Corona Tales. And the idea is to bring coronavirus to the level of children through pictures and texts and narratives so that these children can understand what the story is all about. And some people have taken this a step further by turning them into audio fiction. A few days ago, I met a young lady, Ama Davison, who is into making audio literary things on tapes. These are some of the ways by which we can make our traditional literature, the oral type of literature, relevant to the young ones. We also use this a lot during the apartheid regime, after the apartheid regime, when South Africa instituted this town meeting. I think they call it where people came to give evidence. And many of the witnesses came forward to talk about their experiences and how this would go a long way in solving the problem in the country. The same thing happened in Rwanda after the genocide. People came around, there were peace meetings, all these were recorded in tapes and being played in museums. I visited the memorial in Rwanda a few years ago. And as you enter, you will hear the tapes of people who are giving confessions, who are apologizing for what they did in their traditional language. So you can see that this, our oral literature, is being used in many forms. And because if you don't do this thing, do it this way, the young ones will not be able to find it relevant, and it may die a slow death. So I'm happy that our oral literature is being used in different media, and also by doing this, we are also increasing the audience. If you go to the London Museum of London Museum, you will see a section for African monuments, and there will be a recording reciting some information to you in different African languages to the audience who are both Africans and foreign. So this way, we have been able to use our oral literature to reach a larger audience.
Good. Francis, you, like Wole, you head the Ghana Association of Writers. In what way will you say that the association is strategizing in terms of contemporary literature, in terms of contemporary writing, in blending these two, orality and the written, or what is called the spoken word or spoken artists, as contemporary writers and poets who want to be so described?
Yeah, that is a good question. It falls directly in line with something that I discovered recently. Before I took over office, I heard there has been a workshop that was held just once in Akuse. And that workshop is for writers of the association, where they brought in resource persons in culture, in development, in governance, in politics, to talk to writers. And I believe what the workshop was about at the time is to be able to psych writers to the extent that when you are writing in Africa, or you are an African writer, to make you know that you have a certain duty to your people other than just telling stories. So when COVID started, you know, everything came to a halt. Then at a point we decided that we should, as writers, not just sit down and watch things happen. So we decided that it was a time for us to begin to tell the stories, like Wale showed the book. So we started calling for entries or for book submissions or manuscript submissions in terms of documentation of what was happening at the time. And what I realized is that, I said this somewhere and I want to say it again, that most of the things that we are doing, and in fact, if you go online now, here this is streaming online. You go online now, the average age you find watching us will be 25. What it means is that the older folks don't see this, especially with the online approach to disseminating this type of information. They don't see it as part of them. They still prefer the physical. Therefore, if it is the younger ones who are involved at this moment, how do we get them and try to guide them? So immediately, the association decided that we should have Young Writers Forum. The date has not been fixed, but we started advertising it. And it's to be able to get these young ones, in reference to the Akuse thing, bring resource persons to be able to talk to them. Because if you leave them the way it is now, they will be telling stories that will not reflect our situations. It will not reflect our reality. So we have to begin to guide them. So that's the idea. So at the association level, that is one of the things that we have done. Then also using technology, we decided that aside the hard copy books, we should also make books available to people using the e-book format. So we commissioned members who are ICT experts to develop an application for us. And that application will be launched, if not at the end of November, early December. So it's been done where we collect e-books and place over there. Now it's in two folds. It's to make the books available, at the same time make sure the authors of these books also get some revenue in addition to what they sell in terms of hard copy books. So at the association level, these are some of the things that we have been doing to be able to be in tune with the current situation we find ourselves in. Now there's something that we started talking about in connection with the oral literature and written or even electronic. I touched on it briefly, that to be able to tell stories in this medium, they all have specialities in terms of how you approach the storytelling. You might be telling the same story in a text, but when it comes to, say, electronic medium, you'll be telling the same story, but with the characteristics of that medium. And that is one area that we should also be looking at. How do we transform or transpose our moonlight storytelling onto television, for instance? It shouldn't be simply the recording of the happening in front of the camera, but the art that goes with the recording should also be learned, so we can present these stories in a very compelling manner. Yeah.
It's interesting you are doing what you are doing with the Ghana Association of Writers. Wale, and then Francis, you can come in later on. But it comes to language usage. Because in Ngugi wa Thiong'o's Decolonizing the Mind was a classic when it came out. The arguments are solid, but there is the challenge of what language should a Ghanaian or a Nigerian or Malian writer use in terms of trying to communicate, not within the community, but beyond the community. It looks like Ngugi's argument is a bit stretched from the reality of Africa.
Yes, thank you very much. This is a recurring issue, which again goes back to Ngugi and people like Achebe and Co. And I can recollect that Ngugi wa Thiong'o, in his own determination to write in his language, started writing in Kikuyu, his own language in Kenya. But he had to abandon the whole project when he didn't have the audience. Nobody was buying books in Kikuyu. And this was what was going through my mind yesterday when I listened to Professor Aindo and his colleague debating the issue of writing in our languages. We have a big challenge in Africa. As much as we like to write in our indigenous languages, we first of all have to develop the audience. A writer wants an audience, a publisher wants a market. It's not enough to just go to your village and read to your folks and your relatives. How do you make that book accessible to the larger audience? And this, I tell you one joke which happened, it's an incident that happened. 5 of us from Nigeria went to the US on an exchange program. We were there for 6 weeks. And 2 of us were from different ethnic backgrounds. And 2 of those weeks, the white people were watching us. Then one day, one of them called us and said, look, you don't have a common African language. When you want to talk to yourselves, you speak in English. And that was the truth. That was the sad truth. None of us could understand each other in our traditional language. We had an Igbo man, Yoruba, all this. We couldn't understand each other. We had to go back to English, to the embarrassment of our hosts, who thought we could speak in a language. So for me, I think we continue to search for this unified language, and people have lot of so many suggestions. People are saying that, well, since Swahili seems to be something that is more accessible in Eastern Africa, we could adopt or adapt it for other African ethnic groups and so many other things. But beyond that, I still believe that, and that is one of the problems we are facing now in the Pan-African Writers Association, the issue of language. How do those who write in French understand those who write in English, and those who write in Portuguese understand those who write in Arabic? And everything comes down to, can we come down to getting an African language? In the process, I think what you can do, while we continue to use our colonial languages, I think efforts should also be made in our own small areas, however small it is, to educate our children. Some parents are guilty of this, and I think I'm one of the guilty ones, who refuse to talk to their children in the indigenous language at home. The idea is I want them to speak very good English, so we don't speak vernacular. And then they grow up not speaking good English and not speaking good vernacular. So we need to go back to this.
Okay. Francis, is it very important? Is language that important, or is it knowledge that is important? To have knowledge or to speak in a particular language? Because if we even think of Swahili in East Africa, which is what is possibly part of Africa, it's a working class sort of language. The middle class is not very interested in using that. They are not interested in their children using the Swahili language. But then you could also get into a situation where this generation of students, generation of children, will be more knowledgeable without speaking the vernacular than some who could also speak the vernacular but less knowledgeable in terms of world affairs, and in terms of even the literal landscape.
Yeah, the issue of language, you asked whether it is important in the scheme of affairs now. I would say yes, it is. It is still important. Listening to the conversation that we had here yesterday evening, Wale made reference to that. I'm still convinced that the issue of language is important, because it came out yesterday that certain approaches of telling story can best be told or best be applied in your indigenous language and a foreign language. So listening to that, what I told myself is it should be issue of targeting, and also it should be issue of collaboration. Targeting, as a storyteller or a writer, you first have to know who your story is meant for, and that will determine which language you should write a story in. Then collaboration comes in. We mentioned Kikuyu. You can be a Ghanaian or Ghanaian writer who would like to write in Kikuyu. So the collaboration here means you get in touch with a writer in Kikuyu that you can share your story with.
That is true.
And,
if I may, that is true. And we've this is most exemplified in Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart, in which Igbo proverbs were for the first time popularized across the world, to understand that some people even thought at the time that these were inventions of Chinua Achebe, and that they were not part of the Igbo culture. It's the same with Kofi Awuno's Song of Sorrow, which is so popular among many Ghanaians and beyond Ghana, among many Africans. So that obviously is there. But then the next phase is what happens?
Yeah, I still believe that when it comes to issue of language, it's a long-standing debate, and it's not only in literature, it's in other areas as well, to the point that when it comes to film, for instance, they even want to use the camera. They believe that the person using the camera and in the language in which they are shooting the movie, the person using the camera should understand that language. It should not simply be a camera person. The one editing the film should also understand that language. Not to talk about those acting. And the sound man should also understand the language. So that is how important the issue of language is. You see, so it's something that we can't say we leave out of the scheme of things when it comes to literature in Africa.
Good. Wale, you run the Pan-African Writers Association. I'm sure you've encountered such difficulties. To close up on the language issue, how do you attempt to resolve it?
Yeah, we're looking at it in three ways. The first is to do more translation. Translation, of course, is expensive, but you can't run away from it. Luckily, technology has come to our aid. You have so many apps now. I have one in my phone that can translate from about 20 languages. And so sometimes when I want to communicate with my colleagues in Ivory Coast or Togo in French, all I need to just to switch to the app, and then I'll get the. Sometimes it's not perfect, but at least we're communicating. So we need to look at the issue of translation. Then the next thing is what Francis mentioned: collaboration. We can collaborate with ourselves. English-speaking writers in English language can collaborate with writers in French language and see how we can change ideas. And I also believe that we should invest in education. I really feel embarrassed when I attend international conferences and I see the ease with which some of these francophone writers speak English. Unfortunately, we Anglophone writers, maybe because we believe that English is fantastic, we don't make effort to learn French. So I think I want to throw a challenge to all of us. Now we should try and learn one additional colonial language, because the French-speaking people are taking over jobs that are meant, because many of these international jobs require the use of a second language. And many francophone writers, they are very good in English, but many of us who are anglophone, they are not good in French. So we need to do that. And then finally, to say that once the COVID-19, right now we are organizing virtual meetings because of the pandemic. We've organized 3 virtual meetings under Power for anglophone, francophone writers, and next week we want to tackle the lucophones. I just learned that word. Those are the Portuguese-speaking writers. So we want to do that. But once the pandemic is over, we will encourage physical meetings through which we believe we can learn from each other.
Good. Francis, we are the last segment of this interesting conversation. And I will want us to do a quick review of the cultural landscape based on which the writing of African stories grew. Initially, that is the post-independence, the 1960s, the productivity levels were very high in Ghana and especially Nigeria. But now, the focus is towards the East African region, especially Kenya, in South Africa. South Africa is what is the trend?
Yeah, it is an interesting trend you have noticed. I always tell young writers in the Ghana Association of Writers that they are my target. I tell them they are my target, and this is the reason. I give them an example of between Amai Tedu, Professor Nidohos, Awunos, and the rest, then to my generation. I always tell them my generation, we can safely say disappointed them. Because there has been a long, like that, there has been a gap between those that I'm mentioning and my generation. It looks like literary activity is improving now among the young people. Therefore, the gap that has been created is likely that they will be able to bridge that gap. You mentioned, it seems in the East, literary activity is taking place than our part of the world. It's because they have been able to reach the world. They've been able to go beyond their countries to other parts of, that is why it seems so. But that is what we here are not able to do. So what we decided as an association is to expose the young people to other writers. Wale here has a writer's residency, and a number of young people from the association has been sent to that writer's residency. There are others that have been sent to Sweden. I remember another one going to Burkina Faso. And usually the target has been young women. I don't know how it is, but it's interesting that the younger women or young are writing more than the men.
Yes.
I don't know whether we have noticed that.
That is the trend.
That is the trend. I don't know whether it has been the trend always, but that is what I have noticed.
When I spoke to Professor Wole Soyinka some time ago, he said, even in their time, the 60s, the women writers were that good.
Yes.
But because of the cultural suppression of what they could do, they couldn't realize that at the time until later on. So I think it's been
The trend.
Last word, Wole, and Nigeria is forever rising. And as Francis says, is women who are taking the lead, who are at the forefront.
Well, I think the men are busy watching soccer instead of writing. Maybe that's why. Yeah, you are right. You are right. The ladies are, even in the international residency, which I run in Nigeria, we have had more women coming to the residency. And their explanation is, you see, we are very busy at home. We are either housewives or we are mothers and daughters. So we don't have time to write when they're at home. That's why we need this residency more than anything. So we see many of them coming more in the residency. And I think the only way to encourage the men is to maybe reduce their television time. So they should stop watching football.
Well, it's been very nice talking to the two of you as leaders of African literary organizations. And I hope we'll continue with this conversation in other media, in other forums. Thank you so much.